Everyone keeps saying, stop comparing yourself to others. But no one explains why comparison is one of the most dangerous mental habits of this generation. It doesn't just hurt your confidence, it slowly kills your focus, distorts your self-image, and makes you doubt your own progress even when you're actually improving. The scary part? Comparison feels normal, it feels logical, it feels like motivation, but in reality, it's mental noise created by a brain that's overloaded with unrealistic benchmarks, fake timelines, and constant exposure to other people's highlights. You're not failing, you're measuring your life with the wrong reference point. In this video, we're not doing emotional comfort, motivational quotes, or surface-level advice. We're going full rational. We'll break down comparison from a psychological, neurological, and practical angle, so you understand why your mind does this, how it traps you, and most importantly, how to shut it down permanently. If you've ever felt behind for no clear reason, rushed your decisions, or questioned your worth after seeing someone else succeed, this video is for you. Watch till the end, because once you understand this, comparison loses its power over you forever. The comparison trap. Comparison is one of the most silent but destructive habits of the modern mind. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It sits quietly in your head while you scroll through social media, watch someone else succeed, or hear about another person's achievements. Suddenly, your progress feels smaller, your efforts feel pointless, and your confidence drops without any real reason. Nothing actually changed in your life in that moment, only your perception did. Here's the brutal truth. Comparison is not a sign of ambition, it's a sign of mental distraction. Your brain starts measuring your life using someone else's ruler, someone else's timeline, someone else's circumstances. That's logically flawed. Two different people with different genetics, environments, resources, timing, and luck. Yet your mind acts like the race is fair. It's not. It never was. Social media made this worse. You're not comparing your behind the scenes with someone else's behind the scenes. You're comparing your raw, unfiltered reality with their edited highlights. That's like comparing an unfinished rough draft with a polished final version and calling yourself a failure. From a rational perspective, that's straight up bad data analysis, biased sample, incomplete information, wrong conclusion. Comparison also hijacks your focus. Instead of asking, am I better than yesterday? Your brain asks, why am I not like them? And that shift is dangerous. Growth comes from self-referencing, not other referencing. Science backs this too. Progress is measurable only when the baseline is you, not someone else. So before we talk about stopping comparison, you need to clearly see what it actually is. A mental bug, not motivation. It feels normal because everyone does it, but common doesn't mean correct. In the next part, we'll break down why the human brain is wired to compare, and how understanding this wiring gives you control instead of guilt. Why your brain is addicted to comparison. To stop comparison, you first need to understand one uncomfortable fact. Your brain is not designed for happiness, it's designed for survival. Comparison was once a survival tool. Thousands of years ago, comparing yourself with others helped you understand your position in the tribe. Who's stronger, who's safer to follow, who's a threat. Back then, comparison had utility. Today, it mostly has toxicity. Your brain still runs on old hardware with new age inputs. It doesn't know the difference between a real-life competitor and a random influencer on your screen. When you see someone doing better, your brain interprets it as a threat to status. That triggers stress, anxiety, and self-doubt. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, just in the wrong environment. Another reason comparison feels automatic is dopamine. Every time you compare, your brain searches for validation. Either, I'm better, or, I'm worse but I should catch up. Both create stimulation. The brain likes stimulation, even if it's negative. That's why comparison becomes addictive. You don't even realize you're doing it. It runs in the background like a virus consuming mental bandwidth. Here's the rational part people miss. Comparison gives you zero actionable output. If someone is ahead of you, comparison doesn't tell you how they got there, what resources they had, or what trade-offs they made. It only tells you that they are ahead. That's useless information. In data terms, it's noise without context. And yet, society normalizes it. From childhood, marks, ranks, salaries, followers, you're trained to see life as a leaderboard. But life is not a single game with one scoreboard. It's multiple games being played with different rules at the same time. Comparing across games is intellectually lazy. Once you understand that comparison is a biological reflex amplified by modern systems, guilt disappears. You're not broken, you're just untrained, and anything untrained can be retrained. In the next part, we'll talk about the most dangerous comparison of all, the timeline comparison, and how it silently destroys potential. Timeline comparison, the silent confidence killer. Timeline comparison is when you don't just compare results, you compare when those results happened. He's younger than me and already successful. She figured life out early. People my age are so ahead. This is the most toxic form of comparison because it attacks your sense of time, not just achievement. Here's the logical flaw. There is no universal life timeline. Humans don't run on identical clocks. Some people peak early, some late, some multiple times. History, science, and real life are full of examples where late starters completely changed the game. Your brain ignores this data because fear is louder than facts. Timeline comparison creates fake urgency. You start rushing decisions, choosing shortcuts, copying paths that don't fit you. That's how people burn out, quit too early, or end up in careers they hate. Speed without direction isn't progress, it's chaos. From a rational perspective, slow and aligned beats fast and wrong every single time. Another brutal truth. You don't see the full timeline of others. You only see milestones, not sacrifices. You don't see mental health struggles, family pressure, financial backing, failures, or luck. You're comparing your full story with their highlight timestamp. That comparison is statistically invalid. Timeline comparison also kills learning. When you feel late, your brain shifts from curiosity to panic. And panic is the worst state for growth. Neuroscience shows that stress reduces your ability to absorb new information. So the very comparison that pushes you to hurry actually slows you down. The smartest people don't ask, "Am I late?" They ask, "Am I consistent?" Because consistency compounds, and compounding doesn't care about age. What matters is direction and repetition, not starting point. In the next part, we'll talk about how comparison steals your identity and why copying others is the fastest way to lose yourself. Comparison versus identity. How you lose yourself. When you compare too much, something subtle but dangerous happens. You stop asking what you want. Your goals slowly shift from internal clarity to external validation. You don't choose paths because they fit you. You choose them because they look impressive on someone else's life. This is how identity erosion starts. You see someone succeeding in a field and suddenly question your own direction, even if you were genuinely interested before. Not because your interest died, but because comparison injected doubt. Over time, this creates confusion, indecision, and the feeling of being lost, even though nothing is actually wrong. Here's the rational reality. Copying outcomes without copying inputs is delusional. You don't have the same personality, risk tolerance, learning speed, background, or priorities. Even if you copy the exact steps, results will vary. That's not motivational talk, that's probability. Comparison also pushes you to perform instead of progress. You start doing things to look productive rather than to be productive. Flexing grind without depth, chasing optics over skills. That's why many people look successful but feel empty. They outsourced their identity to trends. A strong identity is built by subtraction, not addition. By removing what doesn't resonate. Comparison does the opposite, it keeps adding noise. More opinions, more paths, more pressure. Your mind becomes cluttered, and clarity disappears. The moment you stop comparing, you don't become lazy, you become selective. You start asking better questions. Does this align with me? Do I enjoy the process? Can I sustain this long-term? Those questions lead to real fulfillment, not borrowed success. In the next part, we'll shift from psychology to action. I'll show you a practical, no-nonsense mental framework to instantly reduce comparison in daily life. A practical mental framework to break the comparison loop. To actually stop comparing, you need more than motivation, you need a mental system. Because comparison is not an emotion, it's a habit loop. And habits don't disappear by willpower. They dissolve when you replace them with a stronger, more logical framework. The first shift is moving from external reference to internal metrics. Instead of unconsciously asking, "How am I doing compared to others?" you deliberately train your brain to ask, "Am I improving compared to my past self?" This single question rewires how your mind measures success. Think of your life like a long-term experiment, not a competition. In any serious experiment, you don't change the control group every day. Your only valid comparison point is your own previous data. When you compare with others, you're mixing datasets from different environments and calling the result meaningful. It isn't. It's mental malpractice. Once you start tracking yourself, skills gained, habits improved, discipline built, the noise of others automatically loses importance because it no longer provides useful information. The second part of the framework is understanding input control versus output obsession. You don't control outcomes directly. You never did. What you control are inputs: hours invested, quality of focus, consistency, and learning intensity. Comparison keeps your attention locked on outputs, money, status, recognition, which are delayed and uneven. That's why it creates frustration. When you shift your attention to inputs, comparison loses relevance, because nobody else can do your inputs for you. Another powerful layer is redefining success in scientific terms. Success is not being ahead, success is reducing error over time. Every day you either learn something, refine a skill, or correct a mistake. That's progress. When you define success this way, someone else's achievement doesn't threaten you, it becomes irrelevant data. Their journey doesn't change your experiment. Finally, you need to accept one uncomfortable truth: comparison will not fully disappear, and that's okay. The goal is not elimination, it's dominance. The moment you notice comparison, you label it as mental noise, not truth. You don't argue with it, you don't suppress it, you redirect. Over time, this redirection becomes automatic. In the next part, we'll talk about how environment, especially digital environment, keeps comparison alive, and how to redesign it without going off the grid. Fix your environment or stay trapped in comparison. If you're constantly comparing, it's not just a mindset issue, it's an environment problem. The human brain is highly reactive to what it repeatedly sees. You can't feed your mind comparison-heavy inputs all day and expect peace by evening. That's not discipline failure, that's bad system design. Your environment programs you more than your intentions ever will. Social media is the biggest amplifier here, but the issue isn't just social media is bad. The issue is how it's used. Most platforms are engineered to push extremes: success, beauty, money, lifestyle, because extremes grab attention. When your brain consumes these images daily, it starts treating them as normal benchmarks. Over time, your own normal starts feeling insufficient, even if you're objectively doing fine. A rational approach is not quitting everything, it's curating ruthlessly. You don't need to follow people who trigger insecurity, urgency, or fake motivation. That's not inspiration, that's psychological pollution. If someone's content makes you feel smaller instead of clearer, it's data you should discard. High performers protect their mental bandwidth aggressively, because they understand that attention is a finite resource. Beyond digital space, physical environment matters too. If you're constantly surrounded by people who flex outcomes without effort, who gossip about success instead of building skills, comparison becomes social currency. In such spaces, growth feels slow because noise is loud. Sometimes, the most productive move is not working harder, but changing rooms. Your environment should make comparison unnecessary. It should quietly push you toward execution, not evaluation. When your daily surroundings reward consistency, depth, and learning, comparison naturally fades because your mind is busy doing real work. You don't compare when you're deeply engaged. Comparison only thrives in idle mental space. In the next part, we'll talk about ego, why comparison is actually an ego issue, and how humility, when understood correctly, becomes a weapon against it. Ego, insecurity, and the real reason comparison hurts. Comparison hurts because it pokes the ego, not because it reveals truth. Ego is simply your mental image of who you think you are and where you think you should be. When reality doesn't match that image, friction happens. Comparison becomes painful not when someone is ahead, but when their position threatens the story you tell yourself about your own progress. Here's the scientific angle. The ego constantly seeks stability. It wants confirmation, not accuracy. So when you see someone outperform you, your brain doesn't calmly analyze variables. It reacts emotionally, because the ego feels attacked. That reaction is not wisdom, it's insecurity trying to protect itself. Understanding this removes shame. The discomfort you feel is not evidence of failure, it's evidence of attachment to an identity. The real problem is expectations. Most people don't suffer because they're behind, they suffer because they believe they shouldn't be behind. That should is imaginary. It's created by societal narratives, peer pressure, and unrealistic success stories. When you drop the idea that life owes you a certain position by a certain age, comparison loses its emotional charge. This is where humility comes in, not the fake, self-deprecating kind, but intellectual humility. The acceptance that you don't know everything, that growth is nonlinear, and that being average today doesn't predict being average forever. Humility gives you permission to be a learner again, and learners don't compare, they observe. When ego is reduced, curiosity increases. Instead of thinking, "Why am I behind?" you start thinking, "What can I learn from this?" That shift transforms comparison from a weapon into a tool, not for self-judgment, but for insight. In the next part, we'll address a hard question people avoid. Can comparison ever be useful? And if yes, how to use it without self-destruction? Can comparison ever be useful? A rational answer. Most people hear, "Stop comparing," and think it means becoming blind to reality. That's not the goal. The goal is to stop toxic comparison, not all comparison. From a rational standpoint, comparison itself is neutral. It's the intent and interpretation that decide whether it helps or harms. Used correctly, comparison can inform strategy. Used emotionally, it destroys confidence. Useful comparison is analytical, not personal. It asks questions like, what skills does this person have that I don't? What systems are they using? How long did it actually take them? This type of comparison doesn't attack your self-worth. It upgrades your approach. It treats others as data points, not judges. The moment comparison turns into self-labeling, "I'm behind, I'm not good enough," it has crossed into irrational territory. The key difference is distance. When you compare without emotional attachment, you stay in control. You don't absorb someone else's success as proof of your failure. You see it as evidence of what's possible under certain conditions. That mindset is empowering, not draining. Scientists, engineers, and strategists compare all the time, but never to insult themselves. They compare to optimize. Another important rule: never compare identity, only compare process. Identity comparison says, "They are smarter than me." Process comparison says, "They practice differently than me." One creates helplessness, the other creates leverage. Identity feels fixed. Process is adjustable. Smart people focus on variables they can actually change. When comparison is used properly, it shortens learning curves instead of creating self-hate. But this requires emotional maturity, knowing when to stop. The moment comparison starts affecting your mood, energy, or self-respect, it's no longer useful. It's noise. In the next part, we'll talk about daily habits and mental practices that slowly, permanently weaken the comparison reflex over time. Daily practices that kill comparison at the root. Stopping comparison permanently doesn't happen through one big realization. It happens through small, boring, daily practices that slowly reprogram your mind. The brain learns through repetition, not insight. You can understand everything logically and still compare emotionally if your daily habits keep feeding the old loop. So this part is about building friction against comparison and momentum towards self-trust. The first practice is daily self-referencing. At the end of each day, you ask one simple but powerful question. What did I do today that my past self couldn't do? It could be learning a concept faster, staying consistent, avoiding distraction, or even handling emotions better. This trains your brain to look backward for validation instead of sideways. Over time, this becomes your default success metric. The second practice is reducing idle mental space. Comparison thrives when the mind is bored, scrolling, or passive. When you're deeply engaged in learning, building, or practicing a skill, comparison disappears automatically. Flow state has no room for envy. So the real solution is not fighting comparison, but filling your life with meaningful difficulty. Work that stretches you just enough to keep you absorbed. Another underrated habit is intentional exposure control. You don't need to consume motivational content daily. In fact, too much motivation without execution increases comparison. Instead, limit exposure to content that triggers unrealistic benchmarks. Replace it with content that improves skills, understanding, or long-term thinking. Your inputs decide your inner dialogue. One more practice that works surprisingly well is writing. When you put your thoughts on paper, vague comparisons lose power. You can't just feel behind, you have to define behind in concrete terms. And once it's defined, it often collapses under logic. Writing turns emotional fog into solvable problems. In the final part, we'll tie everything together and talk about what life actually looks like when comparison no longer controls you, and why that state is a competitive advantage in itself. Life without comparison, the real competitive advantage. When comparison stops dominating your mind, something unexpected happens. You don't become passive, you become dangerous in a quiet way. Your energy stops leaking into self-doubt, anxiety, and mental noise, and starts concentrating into skill building, clarity, and execution. Most people are busy watching others move, you're busy moving. That alone creates an unfair advantage. Life without constant comparison feels slower at first, because you're no longer reacting to external pressure. But that slowness is deceptive. It's depth. You start making decisions based on long-term alignment instead of short-term validation. You choose paths you can sustain, not paths that look impressive for 5 minutes. Over time, this compounds into mastery, and mastery always outperforms rushed imitation. Another powerful shift is emotional stability. When you stop comparing, wins don't inflate your ego and losses don't destroy your confidence. You stay centered. That emotional regulation is rare, and in a world addicted to extremes, rarity is power. Calm thinkers outperform reactive ones in almost every domain: career, learning, relationships, and leadership. You also stop outsourcing your self-worth. Your value no longer rises or falls based on someone else's success. That freedom is not philosophical, it's practical. It allows you to take risks, start late, fail publicly, and iterate without shame. And those behaviors are exactly what lead to real growth. The final truth is this: comparison never made anyone successful. Focus did. Consistency did. Patience did. Self-trust did. When you stop comparing, you don't lose motivation, you finally gain direction. If there's one line to remember from this entire video, it's this: don't ask where others are. Ask whether you're moving. That question alone is enough to change your trajectory.